what I was going to discuss is the happy death, or the phenomena of, so to say, toxic positivity. And first, I'll just describe the general framework, remind you the general framework of my thinking, and then try to show how the discussion of toxic positivity and the pursuit of happiness might feed into it. So if we ask about the general human drive, what is considered within a common sense and within psychology, even psychoanalysis, the main human drive, it's the useless question to ask those who are in the negative group, because you, at least if you don't share my belief, you already know that I think that the death drive is the main drive, but conventionally we consider that this is the life drive is the main drive of a human and of any living organism, meaning the positive drive that we want to survive, we want to live and flourish. But in my opinion, what I'm trying to do is to genuinely see death drive as the central drive, which is quite counterintuitive. And this is the difference between Freud, the early Freud, who is represented in this passage, that explaining the strive after happiness and the desire to be happy and to remain happy. But with late Freud, this changes. The late Freud is the one who asked this question. So starts to doubt if we really want to live. This was actually Sabina Spielrein who made him question if the life drive is the main drive. And this doubt actually ruined the whole thing of psychoanalysis. So the early Freud was a pleasure principle and happiness, strive after happiness. And the late Freud, after 1920, who asked this question, if you really want to live, and claims that, or at least tries to claim that the death drive is the central drive of humans. And the death drive is better formulated by the person who initially introduced this concept, or in her formulation is death instinct. She claims that there is something in us which paradoxically desires self-damaging. And what I'm going to do today is try to see the happiness, the pursuit of happiness, or happiness hype in society as a part of the death drive. And another interpretation of the death drive is repetition compulsion, meaning repetition of traumatic experiences. The way Todd McGowan, and we'll come back to him again, McGowan formulates it in Lacanian sense as the repetition as a desire to come back to originally traumatic and constitutive loss. There is something in it, that in the constitutive loss, in this nothingness, that attracts us and that we repeat. And this repetition or repetition compulsion is constitutive to humans. That's just repetition compulsion, or in McGowan's interpretation, the repetition of loss is another way to describe the death drive, which is, I think, central to humans. So if we talk about hype for happiness, or in our culture that can be described as toxically positive, it's easier to think it as something pleasure driven. So we all want to be happy, or there is this demand to enjoy, to be happy, and our pursuit, individual and within society, the pursuit of happiness, it's easier to see it as pleasure driven, as a part of within a framework of early Freud, that we want to be happy, and we want to be happy, and this is just how we embody this drive towards happiness. But so toxic positivity would be defined as over generalization of optimism, happiness, and other positive states, when we deny, or society denies positive, denies negativity, negative states, tries to not to see them or correct them, and therefore, well, just denies or doesn't see the authentic negative human emotions. And this is basically the criticism of what is now called the criticism of toxic positivity. It has its origin in critical theory, which beautifully described by Russell Jacoby, who claimed that there is this pursuit of happiness, the desperate hunting for pleasures in society. And here in the first sentence, he obviously criticizes late capitalist society, and the contrast to it, critical theory and negative psychoanalysis, is something that's supposed to embrace the negative feeling of sadness and revolt, and which would bring out revolutionary spirit. So this can also be seen as the criticism, or actually this is the origin of criticism of toxic positivity. But for me, problem with both contemporary form of criticism of toxic positivity and the whole hype for happiness, and criticism of this positive direction of a hype of positivity from critical theory, they both for me problematic. Because they such criticism implies a position of certain superiority over those who are imposing happiness. Even in critical theory, there is maybe Russell Jacoby feels the superiority of in relation to those who are hunting for pleasures. And in toxic positivity, when we call it even toxic positivity, this means that we feel superior to those who are hunting for pleasures or hunting for happiness. And this would normally, the criticism of positivity would be normally described mentioning this quote from Nietzsche. This is what Zizek does, for example, when he talks about it from the critical theory position. He would mention the last man from Zarathustra, and this quote that shows that the last man, the bad person, bad type of human that one has to overcome, that this is human that has those little pleasures for the day and the little pleasures for the night. And here in Nietzsche, and whoever brings this quote to criticize toxic positivity occupies the position of someone who is superior to the one they are called the last man. And this is a problem for me, which I want to solve, or try to solve, or at least make it, problematize it in a bit. And this is a slide that I used to love. I still like it, but this slide is, it's funny. It represents the criticism in a way of toxic positivity, and it makes fun of the person, the toxic person, the happy oriented, and the one who is claimed to be the regular person, the depressed person. We can say the adequate person that is not able to pursue happiness anymore. And this person is the one who is in her pursuit of happiness and imposing this perspective to others, which this is great, except for to show the toxic positivity inclination. This is great, except for there are problems with this slide. First, there is misogyny, because this is woman, this one is man, which claims the more adequate person, and the way she is dressed. And the other problem that there is this superiority of this depressed human. It imposes this is how we're supposed to be. So my aim is to see rather, and all of the perspective that I was describing, they still see hype for happiness as acting upon the pleasure principle, right? And criticizing from this perspective maybe But I'm trying to see if the death drive is really constitutive for each human. Then the person on the slide, if we come back to it, then the hype for happiness and those who represent it, or those tendencies in us that represent it, are also death driven. And if we look from this perspective on this slide again, and consider that both, not only this person is death driven and therefore regular or normal person, and this is toxic person who is pleasure driven, like the opposite, driven by the opposite principle. If we consider that they are both death driven, it would actually make sense, because this person seems to me also, we can claim that she's also traumatized, and she's also there is this also destructive processes or self-harm which are going on with her, or even if it's not in what she represents here, it might be seen as trauma response. It's not that she doesn't know something, the depressive truth of existence, we can say. It's not escaping from it or protecting others from it the way she does it here, because imposing this perspective might be also seen as protecting others from not necessarily something that she doesn't know, because protecting and acting the way she does here might also mean that she knows what she's desperately escaping from and what she's desperately protecting others from. So they can see, both can be seen as death driven and with their own unique coping mechanisms that that help them in a way to or don't help them to cope with it. And there are no superior, so none of them is superior. They're just both pathetic, doing whatever they can in their best ways. So there are two options that I'm suggesting how the hype for happiness, or the happiness hype in society, can be interpreted as death driven. This happiness hype, or the pursuit of happiness, toxic positivity, can be seen as trauma response, and also self-care, which is part of somewhat of toxic positivity culture. It can be seen as a repetition compulsion, the second interpretation, Freudian interpretation of death drive. So if we consider happiness hype as trauma response, trauma is certain defined normally as certain distressing event, certain rupture, that it's too much, that we are not able to cope with it. And trauma response comes as over adaptive coping mechanism that helps to survive trauma. And this positivity of trauma, of trauma response, which is adaptive, just as overly adaptive, can be seen as the positivity, but only as a way of sustaining negativity, not something that denies it, but just, so you're scared of it and you're trying to cope. It's not that you don't know. When you deny something, you know it too well. That's why you deny it. It's not the opposite of knowing. And if we come back with this interpretation to the slide, to the meme, again, this can perfectly explain what is happening with the woman here. So they both might be seen as trauma response, both equally pathetic. No one is superior here, unfortunately. And before discussing self-help rituals or self-help culture as the repetition compulsion, let's turn to Schopenhauer. And I know that some of you remember discussing this with me during my UCC course in about death. And Schopenhauer has very interesting relationship with death. And in one of his passages, he describes death as something that occurs while we are alive, and as a gradual vanishing, and when we, not only in old age, when we stop existing while we are alive and everything fades, everything grows pale and flies faster. And he claims that, and we just remain only a shadow or a ghost of the former self. So this gradual disappearance. And not only in old age, but he claims that we dream those dreams, we vanishing even now. I don't know what age Schopenhauer was when he wrote it, but it's actually applicable to any human age. Life is vanishing. Life is the introduction of death, so partial introduction of death. It all just goes, flies away. And another Schopenhauer passage from Schopenhauer, when he talks about death as a friend, and if you bring together those two, death is a relief, death is something desirable. And if we combine together those two passages, that death is something that occurs during life in any age, and the second passage, this one, where he claims that the death it might be a friend of something actually desirable, that we would desire to bring into life, into existence. From this perspective, Schopenhauer's perspective, the self-care can be seen as the repetition compulsion. So self-care is a certain repetition in McGovern's sense of bringing the lack, initial constitutive loss, into life. And some of the self-care rituals remind me, or might be interpreted, they're not normally interpreted, they would normally be considered as practices that improve well-being, but you can also see that they might be seen as practices of death, of this, in Schopenhauer's sense, of introducing death into life gradually, this paling, stripping away from self, emancipating from yourself, or getting rid of yourself, like taking a nap, sleeping, basically disappearing for a while, or meditating is also useless activity, meaning it doesn't have any utility. One might claim that it improves something, but it needs to be justified, because it's the core of it, at least in my opinion, that's beauty of it, that it's useless and you just do nothing. Intentionally, you embrace nothingness for a while and yourself disappears. And similarly with writing and reading, when you distract yourself from yourself, when yourself stop existing, or bath tub, or going for a walk, it's just distraction. Or candles are also useless ridiculous activities, but through this they might be seen as the introduction of the rituals of death, those introduction in Schopenhauer's sense of death that is required for what we call existence. And we can also bring here discussion of Todd McGowan's interpretation of rituals, that and consider they sometimes called self-help rituals. And for example, Todd McGowan considers religious rituals as a part of this repetition compulsion, of repetition of a loss, or repetition of a lack, which constitutes society, and accordingly the self, the absence of self that constitutes self. So he interprets religious rituals as something that remains now, just in modified form, and he just considers it as the repetition of this encounter with nothingness. And for this reason, those rituals were something that constitutes society or social bond. And now we have self-help culture that pretends to be the opposite, something aimed at life, not introducing death. But the way I can tolerate it, and the way I like to think about it, is precisely death practices. And from this, which also gets rid of the stigmatization of positivity, like it digs deeper into what is called toxic positivity, eliminating the hierarchy between the negativity demonstrated and positivity demonstrated, and shows that they are not radically different. And in Nietzschean interpretation that can be seen, that those self-help rituals of what is called last man are the little mortifications instead of pleasures for the day, and one's little mortifications for the night that we need to exist. So if you have questions and answers, I'll be happy to, not happy, I'll answer them. I'll just stop recording it.